night had begun like countless others, yet something about it felt strangely unnatural from the start. The silence that hung in the air wasn't the ordinary kind. The kind that comes when the world outside finally goes to sleep was heavier, suffocating, almost as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. My room was dimly lit by the bluish glow of my computer screen, its flickering light casting uneven shadows that stretched across the cluttered desk and danced faintly along the walls. Each tick of the clock above my bed seemed amplified, striking with a hollow echo that made the space feel emptier than it should have been. I sat there, hunched over my keyboard, trying to lose myself in the monotony of work, but every small sound clawed at my nerves. The hum of the old ceiling fan, the faint crack of wood as the house settled, even the low rustle of the wind brushing against the windows, all of it felt louder, sharper, as if the silence had magnified everything else. My chest tightened with a vague unease I couldn't explain. Normally, nights were my sanctuary. The calm gave me focus, time to think without the chaos of the day pressing against me. But tonight was different. Tonight, the silence didn't comfort, MIT stalked me. I found myself pausing often, my fingers hovering above the keyboard, as though waiting for something. Some sound that hadn't come yet, but that I knew deep in my bones was waiting for me. I leaned back in my chair, eyes darting toward the corners of the room. They were just shadows, I told myself. Just the ordinary darkness of a small bedroom at night. But the longer I stared, the more those shadows seemed alive, stretching, breathing, almost watching. My pulse quickened, and I shook my head, forcing a nervous laugh to escape my lips. It was ridiculous. I was letting the quiet get to me, yet no matter how hard I tried to dismiss it, the feeling wouldn't fade. The silence pressed down harder, thickening the air, as though the world outside my four walls had fallen away completely. In that moment, it was just me, the shallow rhythm of my breathing, and the suffocating weight of something unseen, something waiting just beyond the edges of light. It began so subtly that, at first, I thought my imagination was playing cruel tricks on me. One moment, I was typing away, trying to force myself back into focus, and the next, I felt it. Not a sound, not a movement, just a presence, heavy, oppressive, unmistakable. It was as though someone had quietly walked into the room and stood behind me, close enough that the back of my neck tingled with heat. Yet the air around me felt unbearably cold. I froze instantly, my fingers hovering above the keyboard, paralyzed between a keystroke and silence. The hum of my computer seemed to vanish. The clock on the wall might as well have stopped ticking. My entire awareness sharpened to that single point, the invisible weight pressing against me. My skin crawled with the sensation of being watched, as though unseen eyes were boring into me, dissecting every breath, every tiny movement. At first, I tried to reason with myself. You're just tired. You've been staring at the screen for hours. But deep down, something primal rejected that excuse. This wasn't exhaustion. This wasn't paranoia. This was real. My heart began to thud wildly in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears like a drum, drowning out rational thought. I wanted to turn around, but the thought filled me with indescribable dread. The fear wasn't simply of seeing someone standing there, it was the fear of confirming that the space behind me wasn't empty, that something unnatural had slipped into my room and was now hovering just inches away. My throat went dry, and my breath caught, shallow and shaky. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours. The longer I sat frozen, the stronger the sensation became, almost as if the presence was drawing closer, inch by inch. A faint chill brushed down my spine, not like the draft of a window, but like the icy exhale of something standing too near. I clenched my fists in my lap, every nerve screaming at me to move, but my body refused. My mind scrambled for logic. Maybe it's the shadow from the fan. Maybe it's just the pressure of working too late. But no amount of rationalization could shake the primal terror clawing at me. This wasn't in my head. It was behind me, waiting. And that was the most terrifying part. Whatever it was hadn't revealed itself yet. It lingered, silent, as if testing me, savoring my fear before making its move. The silence had grown unbearable. I sat frozen in my chair, every muscle locked, too terrified to turn around, yet too aware of the weight looming behind me. My ears strained for the slightest sound, but the room held its breath. For a brief moment, I almost convinced myself it was all in my imagination, that the heavy presence pressing down on me was nothing more than exhaustion. And then, it happened. A voice. It wasn't loud. In fact, it was so faint, so soft, that at first I thought it was the wind sneaking through the cracks of the window. But no, the sound was too close, too deliberate. The words brushed against my ear like a breath that didn't belong to me. I'm here. The whisper was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It carried no clear identity, and that made it all the more terrifying. It was as if the voice belonged to the very darkness itself, spoken not by a person, but by the shadow that had been waiting behind me all along. My blood ran cold. Every hair on my body rose in an instant, and my breath caught violently in my throat. I didn't move. I couldn't. My heart slammed against my ribs, beating so fast I thought it might burst. The whisper was so close like the lips of whoever, or whatever, had spoken were inches from my ear. And yet, when I forced my trembling eyes to shift toward the glass window beside my desk, I saw only the faint reflection of my own pale, frightened face. No one else. No shape. No presence. Still, the echo of the whisper clung to me, crawling inside my skull, refusing to let go. It repeated itself in my mind, over and over again. I'm here. I'm here. I'm here. The meaning of those two words was simple and horrifying. Whatever it wasn't passing by. It wasn't a fleeting hallucination. It was declaring itself, announcing its arrival, as if it had been waiting for the perfect moment to let me know that I was not alone. I wanted to scream, but my voice betrayed me, caught somewhere between my chest and throat. Instead, a shaky breath slipped out, shallow and uneven. My trembling hands gripped the edge of my desk, the wood biting into my palms as I tried to ground myself in reality. But reality no longer felt solid. The whisper had shattered the fragile barrier between imagination and truth. For the first time, I dared to think the unthinkable. There was something in my room, something alive, aware, and far too close, and it wanted me to know it. My body refused to obey me at first. Every instinct screamed to stay frozen, not to move, not to acknowledge the voice that had slithered into my ear. But the silence that followed was even worse than the whisper itself. It stretched, thick and unbearable, until the pressure of it nearly crushed me. I had to know. I had to look. Very slowly, as though moving through water, I turned my head. My eyes scanned the room, my breath shallow and ragged. The familiar outlines of my bedroom greeted me, the cluttered desk stacked with papers, the unmade bed, the pile of laundry in the corner. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. My chair creaked softly as I twisted further, every sound magnified by the suffocating silence. And then my gaze swept across the shadows. They clung to the walls, bending and twisting with the faint glow of my computer screen. At first, they seemed ordinary, just the darkness where the light couldn't reach. But the longer I looked, the more they seemed to shift, subtly, almost imperceptibly, as though they were alive. My heart pounded harder, sweat beading at the back of my neck. I forced myself to focus, to find the source of the whisper. My eyes darted from corner to corner, desperately searching for movement, for a figure, for anything that could explain what I had heard. But the room stared back at me with an emptiness so complete it felt mocking. Nothing. And yet, the absence of evidence wasn't reassuring, it was terrifying. The room should have felt safe now, familiar, ordinary, but it didn't. Instead, the air felt colder, thicker, as though something unseen had just slipped out of sight the moment I turned. I couldn't shake the thought that if I spun around quickly enough, I'd catch it standing there, right behind me, waiting. I whispered into the dark, my voice trembling, "Hello." The single word cracked in the silence, swallowed instantly by the air around me. No answer came, but that didn't comfort me either. My rational mind tried to claw its way back. "You imagined it. You're tired. It was just your thoughts echoing in the silence." But deep inside, I knew the truth. That whisper hadn't been born from my own mind. It had been real. Someone, or something, had spoken to me in the dark. And though my eyes told me the room was empty, my body screamed otherwise. The presence hadn't left. It was still there, watching, waiting, hiding in the spaces where the light dared not reach. The worst part was realizing that emptiness doesn't always mean safety. Sometimes, an empty room is the most dangerous place of all, because you can't see what's hiding in it. After that night, it stopped being a single moment and became a continuous weather in atmosphere that settled over every hour of my life. At first it hovered at the edges, a barely noticeable pressure that made my skin itch and my shoulders tense. But as days passed, it accumulated like fog, thickening until I could no longer ignore it. The presence pulsed through the house in slow, patient waves, arriving whenever the lights dimmed or the world outside paused for breath. It was no longer confined to one corner of the room. I would be in the kitchen, spoon frozen mid-air, and feel the same weight settle behind me as if someone had chosen that instant to study the hollow of my neck. I would stand in the hallway and sense it at my back, like the cold of a damp stone. Even amid noise, television chatter, city traffic, the polite clatter of neighbors, it had a way of carving a private silence around me, isolating me from everything else, until all that remained was my heartbeat and its patient watching. The oddest thing was how the presence seemed to time itself to my vulnerabilities. It arrived more insistently in the half-light between waking and sleep, when my defenses lowered and the mind wandered. It learned the rhythm of my days when I left for work, when I returned, when I paused to breathe, and matched those rhythms with an almost clinical persistence. Sometimes it felt close enough to brush my skin. Other times it hovered farther away, a distant shape that deepened the shadows without ever revealing an outline. I started to notice patterns. Small objects shifted subtly after I left the room. A book that had been on the floor would be on the table when I returned. My phone, face down, would be turned over. Nothing dramatic, just nudges that suggested movement without witnesses. The presence preferred these small humiliations, these tiny proofs that it could move through my world unnoticed. Sleep retreated from me. When I finally succumbed to exhaustion, my dreams turned thin and jagged, populated by empty doorways and long corridors that led nowhere. I woke often with the impression of being observed, of some patient silhouette frozen at the edge of sight. Friends called to ask if I was okay. I lied and said yes. How could I explain that my home no longer felt like mine, that somewhere between light and dark something had taken up residence and would not be negotiated with? The worst part was not the fear itself, but the certainty that the presence felt no hurry. It would wait, and in waiting it eroded me minute by minute, breath by breath, until I began to wonder which of us would be left when it finally decided to move. It didn't take long before the presence grew bolder. What had begun as a suffocating weight in the air slowly transformed into something I could almost see. At first, it was subtler flicker, a distortion in the corner of my vision, like the way heat rises from asphalt on a scorching summer day. I would be walking down the hallway, carrying a glass of water, and for the briefest second, I would notice it, a shape, tall and unnaturally still, lurking just beyond my direct line of sight. By the time I whipped my head around, it would vanish, dissolving back into ordinary shadows, as though it had never been there at all. But the mind has a way of holding on to patterns, even in fear. Each time it happened, the silhouette was always the same, elongated, faceless, impossibly dark. Not the vague smudge of imagination, but something consistent, as though it wanted me to recognize it. The very consistency made it undeniable. I was not inventing it. Something was truly there, watching me, retreating only when I sought proof. The glimpses tormented me most at night. I would lie in bed, staring at the faint light spilling through the curtains, when I'd sense movement by the doorway. My eyes, heavy with exhaustion, would drift toward the threshold, and there it was again. A figure, tall and motionless, lingering just outside the frame of clarity. My pulse would thunder in my ears as I blinked furiously, praying that the image was only a trick of my mind. And yet, every time my eyes adjusted, the shadow remained, until the instant I tried to focus directly on it. Then it was gone, melting into the stillness of the room. I began to dread peripheral vision altogether. The corners of my eyes no longer felt like safe boundaries. They became traps, gateways where the thing could reveal itself just long enough to remind me I was never alone. Even in daylight, when the sun poured through the windows and I convinced myself I was safe, I would catch it, standing at the far edge of the street, blending seamlessly with the dark line of trees. I would blink, rub my eyes, and when I looked again, the space was empty. This torment built inside me like a fever. I could no longer trust what I saw, but worse, I could no longer trust what I didn't see. Every glance, every shift of light, carried the possibility of that faceless form. It was always waiting, lingering just far enough to remain hidden, yet near enough that my soul recognized it. I realized then that the shadow wasn't trying to stay unseen. It wanted to be glimpsed. It wanted me to know it was there, but never enough to let me catch it in full. And that cruel game, those fleeting fragments of its presence, began to unravel the last strands of my sanity. When the whisper first came, it was a shock, a single, poisonous breath of sound that slipped into my ear and left the room trembling. But that was only the opening chord. Over the following nights, the voice returned, not as a one-time event, but as a persistent, intimate chorus that learned the cadence of my life. It found my quietest hours, the thin stretch between midnight and 2 in the morning when thought grows fragile, and it filled them with small, merciless phrases. I'm here. Watch me. Come closer. Each repetition was a hook, and every hook drew me deeper into a rhythm that I could not escape. The whispers changed in tone as if the plying thing behind them were experimenting, testing which words cut the deepest. Sometimes they were patient and almost bored, a sibilant susurration that seemed to ricochet off the wallpaper. Other times they became urgent, hissing like steam, pressing a pressure behind my skull that made me dizzy. They invaded private places, falling on me while I showered, slipping through the vent when I thought I was alone, echoing alongside the static of the radio. They were clever. They would pause at the exact moment I dared to speak, leaving only the memory of sound hanging in the air like smoke. With every return, the content shifted. It began by announcing presence, then moved to observation, and eventually to suggestion. It started naming things I had done, small, private actions I hadn't told anyone, and spoke them aloud, as if reading from a ledger of my life. The effect was icy. My world shrank. Rooms felt like pages, and the pages were being read aloud by a stranger who knew me better than I knew myself. The whispers had learned not only to find me, but to know me. At night, they often threaded themselves into my dreams. I'd wake with words half on my tongue, sentences I'd never intended to form now rolling round my mouth. During the day, they lingered like afterimages, the faint echo of a syllable that made my skin prickle and my hands clench. They blurred the line between memory and present, making me question whether I'd heard something before or whether I'd simply imagined it and then watched it manifest. Most terrifying was how the whispers manipulated silence, making it thick where before it had been thin, filling empty spaces with expectation. They never shouted. They never needed to. Their quietness was the point. Soft threats are harder to resist, and with time I learned that my every small movement could be guided by a word I hadn't realized had been planted in my ear. So the whispers returned, night after night, patient and precise, until I no longer measured time by hours or meals, but by the way the voice altered the angles of the room. Each visit left me a little more narrowed, my decisions subtly rerouted, by something that spoke only to the places I thought were mine. Sleep stopped being rest and turned into a negotiation. I bargained with the dark like a debt of 5 more minutes with the lights on. One more page of a book I couldn't follow. Another cup of scorched coffee that left my hands trembling. Midnight lost its meaning. Time fractured into red digits on the bedside clock. Each minute a tiny cliff I had to climb. 1:43, 2:07, 2:28. I told myself that if I could just make it to morning, I would be safe. Morning never arrived the way it used to. It dragged itself over the horizon like a wounded animal. When my body finally surrendered, it did so in ragged shudders, brief, collapsing dozes that ended in violent jolts. I would drift for seconds, and then wake with the cold certainty that something had leaned over me and whispered a word I couldn't remember. My pillow carried the shape of a head that wasn't mine. The mattress dipped in a slow, deliberate way, as if someone had taken care not to wake me, and failed. The house learned my weaknesses. The ceiling fan clicked in uneven rhythms that mimicked breathing. The refrigerator groaned like a distant door opening. Floorboards flexed just out of sight. I tried earplugs, a white noise app, the hiss of rainfall through my phone speaker. The sounds only sharpened what they were meant to blur. The presence threaded itself between them like a needle sewing through fabric, pulling the room tight around me. On the worst nights, I slid into a grey place between waking and sleep and found I could not move. My eyes were open. My mind screamed. My body lay obedient and useless. In that paralysis, the air thickened at the foot of the bed. A weight climbed onto my chest, not crushing, not heavy enough to stop my breath, just exact enough to measure it. Close to my ear, a pause, and then a soft exhale that matched the rhythm of my own, mocking it into sync. Morning light, when it came, had no forgiveness. It showed me what the dark had done, the shallow half-moons beneath my eyes, the tremor in my hands, the hairline cracks in my patience that made even the smallest decision feel like walking a narrow ledge. Daylight did not banish the shadow, it only made it polite. I'd catch it lurking in the glint of a window, in the shine of a spoon, in the pause between blinks. I built rituals to survive 2 lamps left on. Closet doors latched, The chair in the corner turned to face the wall. I lined up water glasses on the nightstand, as if constructing a fragile barrier of reflections. None of it mattered. The presence did not need darkness to thrive. It needed exhaustion. It waited while I starved myself of sleep, and in that starvation it found more of me to claim. Eventually, I understood the true shape of the trap. Sleep was not a refuge I had been driven from. It was a doorway the shadow was teaching me to open. Every hour I resisted only made the threshold wider. When I finally stumbled through, I would fall not into rest, but into the place where it was strongest, where faces appear in mirrors and do not leave when you turn away. The first time I truly saw it was not in the corner of my eye or in the vague distortions of shadows, but in the mirror. That morning began, like all the others, hollow, with my body dragging itself through the motions of routine, while my mind stayed frayed at the edges from another sleepless night. My reflection looked alien to me already. Pale skin stretched too thin, dark bruises beneath my eyes, lips trembling from fatigue. I had stopped recognizing the person staring back, and perhaps that's why I didn't notice the other presence right away. Steam curled lazily from the hot shower I had just finished, fogging the bathroom glass. I reached up to wipe the condensation with the back of my hand, smearing the surface into a dull, imperfect clarity. That was when my stomach dropped. Behind, my reflection just a step beyond me, as though it had always been there, stood a figure. It wasn't blurry like a trick of the steam. It wasn't a vague suggestion of shape. It was distinct, tall, far taller than me, its shoulders stretching unnaturally broad, its outline dripping with a darkness that seemed heavier than any shadow. There was no face, no features, just a void where a face should have been, a space that seemed to swallow all light and give nothing back. I froze, toothbrush halfway to my mouth, every muscle in my body locking. My mind scrambled to rationalize. It's a trick of the fog. It's the towel rack. It's just your imagination reflected back at you. But even as the excuses rushed forward, I saw it move, a slow, deliberate tilt of the head, as though it was studying me with interest, mocking the way I was staring at it. My heart crashed against my ribs. I spun around in panic, expecting to see it looming in the small, cramped bathroom space. Nothing. The tiles glared back at me, sterile and empty. The door was shut. No one was there. And yet, when I turned back, to the mirror, the figure was still present, still standing behind my reflection, as if I were caught between two worlds. One I could see directly, and one that revealed itself only in glass. For the briefest, most horrifying moment, I saw its arm twitch. The darkness stretched outward, slow and careful, until its shadowy hand hovered inches above my shoulder. I could almost feel it, an invisible weight pressing down, cold and invasive. My breath fogged the glass, obscuring the image, but not quickly enough. I staggered backward, knocking the toothbrush to the floor, my entire body trembling like a string pulled too tight. When I dared wipe the mirror again, the figure was gone. Just me remained, my pale face, wide eyes, and the uncontrollable shaking of someone who knew the boundary between the ordinary and the impossible had been shattered. I left the bathroom that day with the lights still on and the door wide open, unable to bear the thought of closing myself inside with the mirrors again. From that moment on, I began covering reflective surfaces at night, mirrors, windows, even the black screen of my computer when it powered down. Because I had learned a truth that could not be unlearned. Mirrors do not just reflect. Sometimes, they reveal. And once something knows you can see it, it will always come back to be seen again. The encounter in the mirror left me rattled in ways I couldn't fully process. Days passed, but the memory refused to fade, looping in my mind like a broken reel of film. I replayed it over and over. The fog, the tilt of the head, the hand reaching for me. Each time I tried to dismiss it as a trick of the steam, my body betrayed me. My heart would race, my palms would sweat, and my stomach would churn as though I had stared into something that should never have existed. And so the doubts began to fester. Was it real? Or was I losing myself to exhaustion and paranoia? I found myself whispering questions into empty rooms. Did I really see it? Did I imagine the hand? Could it all be in my head? The silence that followed was never comforting. It was accusing. It left me wondering whether the very act of asking had already proven that I was unraveling. People around me noticed changes. Friends who once joked about my late nights now frowned at the hollow circles beneath my eyes. They asked if I was sick, if I needed a break, if something was wrong. I gave them quick smiles and shrugged it off with lies. I'm just tired. Work's been crazy. I'm fine. But deep down, I wasn't fine. Every time their concerned eyes lingered on me, I wondered how long it would be before someone else started whispering behind my back, "He's not well. He's losing it." The thought terrified me more than the shadow itself. What if I was going mad? Madness meant there would be no escape, no solution, only the slow suffocation of a mind betraying itself. I began scouring articles online late into the night, desperate for answers. Sleep paralysis, hallucinations caused by stress, psychosis brought on by insomnia. Each explanation felt like a dagger, logical, rational, damning. They told me the same thing in different words: you are sick, not haunted. And yet, for every article I read, there were moments that logic couldn't explain. The objects moving when I wasn't looking. The whisper that repeated private words I'd never spoken aloud. The photographs with faint, unexplainable blurs behind me. My rational brain insisted these were coincidences, but my gut screamed otherwise. The divide between those two voices pulled me apart until I no longer knew which to trust. The worst moments came in the quiet stretches of night, when the shadow seemed closest. I would sit on the edge of my bed, rocking back and forth, whispering to myself, "You're fine. You're imagining it. You're not crazy." But those words carried no weight. If I had to remind myself I wasn't insane, wasn't that already proof that I was? My sanity became another battleground. I questioned my memories, doubted my senses, second-guessed my own thoughts. Every reflection in the mirror, every flicker in the corner of my eye, every creak in the floorboards felt like a test I was destined to fail. The shadow didn't need to touch me anymore. It only had to wait, as I dismantled myself piece by piece. And as the days bled into nights and the whispers refused to stop, one thought haunted me more than all the others. Maybe the shadow wasn't trying to kill me. Maybe it was trying to drive me mad. And if that was its purpose, it was already succeeding. The first flicker was easy to dismiss. An old bulb, a bad connection, nothing supernatural. But when the lights began to stutter, in time with my heartbeat, excuses ran thin. It would start as a subtle shiver in the room, a single lamp dimming, for a breath, then brightening again as if nothing had happened. Then another fixture would answer, a chain reaction of small betrayals that left me standing in a constellation of unreliable light. At first the pattern was random. A hallway bulb would gutter as I passed. The kitchen overhead would flutter when my back was turned. But patterns, like fear, organized themselves. Soon the flickers arrived at exactly the moments that mattered. As I reached for the phone, when my hand hovered above the doorknob, while I stared at the bathroom mirror, each blink felt intentional, like the room itself was winking at me, mimicking, coaxing, testing whether I would notice. There was a new quality to the darkness that settled between blinks, not merely absence of light, but a pressure that tasted metallic and close. During a blackout, when every screen and lamp died, the world inside my apartment condensed into the sound of my breathing. The darkness became thicker, almost tactile. It pulled in corners, crawling along baseboards, and in that thickened space, the shadow moved with confidence. I would stand in the dark and feel the temperature change, as if the room had been reshaped by something unseen. Sometimes the lights didn't merely flicker. They revealed a flash would catch the outline of a tall shape in the doorway, or throw its featureless face into partial relief on the far wall, only for the next pulse to blot the image away. The effect was cruel. Sight offered a momentary confirmation and then yanked it back, leaving me more certain and more desperate than before. I began to dread any sudden change in illumination. The brief clarity after a flicker was the worst because it confirmed that what I feared could be seen, if only for an instant. Electronics started to behave as if they, too, were in league with the intruder. Lights dimmed when I whispered into the dark. The TV would snap off mid-sentence when I tried speaking back to the shadow. My phone screen would glitch, displaying fragments of static that resolved into shapes impossible to name. Each device became an unreliable witness. It recorded the presence in split-hard, half-formed images that made sense only when you were already convinced of the thing's existence. I tried practical fixes: new bulbs, rewiring, surge protectors. I replaced fuses and reset breakers, as if I could argue with the house and win. For a while, the repairs brought me a thin calm, but the pattern returned and grew bolder. The lights didn't just fail, they punctuated the shadow's performances. In the strobe of their failure and rebirth, the room became a stage, and I was its sole audience, watching, exhausted, and learning that the light could be manipulated like breath. When a house no longer follows the rules of illumination, you begin to feel vulnerable in the most basic way. Light is supposed to be truth. It is meant to banish the corners where fears hide. But with the flickering lights, even truth had turned traitor. The darkness was no longer a backdrop. It was an actor with timing, with intent, and with a cruel understanding of the human reliance on sight. Every time a bulb shivered and died, I felt the shadow take a step closer. It began so faintly that, at first, I thought it was only the sound of my own exhaustion, the uneven rhythm of lungs that had been denied rest for too long. But on that night, lying flat on my back in a room swallowed by shadows, I realized there was another pattern of breath in the dark. It wasn't mine. The sound was slow, deliberate, heavy, like someone forcing air through lungs that were far too large, or far too empty. At first I told myself it was the house, pipes shifting, wood settling, the usual complaints of an old structure at night. But no explanation matched the cadence. It came in long, wet drags, rising from just above me, not from behind the walls or under the floorboards. I tried to hold my breath, desperate to test whether the noise was simply my imagination echoing itself. For a few seconds my chest ached, my body screamed for oxygen, yet the sound continued, unbothered, inhaling deeply while I lay still. My heart sank. It wasn't me, but the realization froze me in place. My eyes strained in the darkness, searching for movement, for a silhouette against the faint glow leaking through the curtains. I could see nothing, just black shapes layered on black shapes, but the breathing grew clearer the longer I listened. It shifted subtly, from above my head to the side of the bed, then closer, until I could feel the warmth of its rhythm disturb the hairs on my arm. Terror became physical. My muscles locked, as if bound, my throat constricted with the primal urge to scream, yet no sound emerged. I lay in paralysis, my body betraying me while my mind begged for escape. The breathing grew heavier, as though it were leaning closer, pressing its faceless presence toward me until the mattress dipped beneath an invisible weight. Minutes stretched like hours. The sound did not falter, did not change, was patient, steady, as though the thing drawing breath had no need for haste. I began to wonder if this was its way of feeding, not with teeth or claws, but by stealing the air from my lungs, forcing me to exist in its rhythm. Finally, in a desperate attempt to break free, I flung myself upright. The movement was clumsy, panicked, fueled by pure survival. My chest heaved as I sucked in air, but the moment I moved, the breathing stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself, because it felt intentional. It was not the silence of something gone. It was the silence of something watching. I sat there trembling, drenched in cold sweat, listening to the blood roar in my ears. I wanted to turn on the light, to shatter the darkness, but my hand refused to move toward the switch. Part of me feared the light wouldn't come on at all. Part of me feared it wouldn't, that I would finally see what had been leaning so close to my face. That night I understood something vital. The shadow didn't need to reveal itself to torment me. It only needed to breathe. And in the simple, human act of inhaling and exhaling, it claimed the air between us, until even breathing no longer felt like my own. For a time, I clung to the fragile belief that the shadow was bound to my home, that if I left, if I stepped into the noise and chaos of the world beyond my walls, I could escape its suffocating presence. But soon I discovered the truth. There was no safe place, no sanctuary. The shadow had learned to follow. It began on a quiet evening walk. The streets were nearly empty, lit only by the amber glow of aging street lamps. The night air was damp, carrying the faint smell of rain-soaked asphalt. For the first time in days, I almost felt free. My shoulders loosened, and my lungs filled with something other than dread. That was when I heard them. The footsteps started first. I thought they were my own, bouncing back from the narrow walls of the street. But as I slowed, so did they. When I stopped, the echo didn't fade. It stopped, too, half a beat late, as if mocking me. My chest tightened. The rhythm wasn't mine. It belonged to someone or something else. I turned sharply, scanning the empty street. The lamps threw long shadows across the cracked pavement, stretching into darkness, but no one was there. The road lay silent, still. Yet when I forced myself to keep walking, the sound resumed, measured, patient, always a step behind, never hurried. I began to feel hunted, as if the city itself had become a labyrinth, and I was its prey. The encounters grew more frequent. In crowded places, I would catch glimpses in reflective windows. A tall, faceless outline just beyond my shoulder. On the train, I felt the weight of eyes on me, though no one sat close enough. In the grocery store, between aisles stacked with canned goods, a dark blur would vanish the instant I turned my head. But the streets at night were the worst. The shadow thrived under street lamps, waiting for the exact moment I passed beneath one. Just as the light haloed me, I would sense it behind me, tall and stretched, merging with my own silhouette on the ground. For a breathless moment, there were two of me, one human, one wrong, and by the time I stumbled forward into the next pool of light, it would disappear again, leaving only my trembling form. The presence carried the same coldness outside as it did in my room, wrapping itself around me like invisible chains. I couldn't run from it. I tried, once breaking into a panicked sprint through the empty streets, my shoes slapping against the pavement. My heart thundered, my lungs burned, but no matter how fast I ran, the footsteps never fell behind. They matched me perfectly, as though the shadow enjoyed the chase, never needing to show itself to remind me I was caught. By the time I stumbled home, drenched in sweat and terror, I understood a terrifying truth. The shadow was no longer tied to places. It was tied to me. It didn't matter where I went, what streets I crossed, or how far I fled, it would follow, always just out of reach, always one step behind, waiting for the moment I grew too tired to run, and deep inside, I began to wonder if that had been its plan all along. It started as a small, almost laughable discovery and out-of-focus smudge in the corner of a picture I had taken on a whim. At first I told myself I'd smeared the lens, that a thumbprint or dust had ruined the frame, but the more photos I checked, the clearer the pattern became. Behind me, faint and wrong, there was something that the eye could not easily explain away. The images were banal: a selfie taken at a bus stop, a grainy shot of my living room from across the hall, a quick capture of a sunset. In each, a dark outline hovered just beyond the edges of my reflection or my body. It wasn't a full solid form in most pictures, more like a smear, where light refused to sit, a vertical absence that ate color and detail. When I enlarged the files, the shape sharpened into something deliberate, an elongated torso, a suggestion of shoulders, always faceless, always positioned as if watching me from behind. It never appeared in the same place twice. Instead, it lurked in the background, patient, like a recurring watermark on the fragile pages of my life. At first I tried to rationalize. Camera artifacts, compression, low light. There were plausible, technical explanations for nearly everything. Friends with better cameras laughed and sent back diagrams of noise reduction and shutter speeds. But then I found one photograph that refused explanation, a picture taken by my sister at a birthday dinner. The room was bright, faces turned toward cake and candlelight. In the glossy print, near the back wall, a tall, dark figure stood as if ignoring the celebration. It was not a shadow cast by a person in the room. It had depth where shadows did not, a density that swallowed the candlelight rather than supplying it. The images did something my ears could not. They turned a private terror into visible proof. I began cataloging them, creating a folder with timestamps and notes, as if collecting evidence could lend me control. Each photograph tightened the hold the presence had on me. The more I looked, the more I understood its cruelty. It enjoyed being seen only indirectly. In images, it could be frozen and scrutinized without consequence. It wanted me to find it, to study it, to know that it could be captured and still remain unreachable. Sometimes the photos revealed more than one glimpse. A sequence might show it growing closer, a dark smear resolving into something more defined, as if the thing itself was learning how to occupy pixels. Other times, a flash would catch a hand-like smear, hovering near my shoulder. In the split second, the shutter closed. Those frames left me shaking. The camera had recorded what my eyes had been denied. Having proof should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like a sentence. The pictures confirmed the worst. This was not mere exhaustion or imagination. It was an intrusion that respected no boundary, no element of privacy. In the glossy rectangles of my life, the thing waited, patient and permanent. A reminder that some witnesses are visible only when you try to make them speak. The whispers had always been chilling, but they carried an almost predictable rhythm, reassurances of presence, reminders that I was never alone. I'm here, it would breathe, over and over again, like a lullaby sung by something without a mouth. But one night, as the house lay in silence and I hovered between exhaustion and sleep, the words changed. They didn't soothe, they threatened. It began the same way it always did. a soft brush of air against my ear that sent shivers racing down my spine. My muscles tightened, waiting for the familiar phrase. Instead, what came was different, sharper, filled with malice. "You can't escape." The sentence landed with a weight that crushed my chest. For the first time, the voice wasn't simply announcing itself, it was issuing a decree. Those 3 words echoed in my skull, each syllable drawn out as though the shadow relished my reaction. My breath quickened, shallow and uneven, as if the very act of hearing had stolen control of my lungs. I sat upright in bed, heart hammering, scanning the dark corners of my room. The whisper didn't return immediately. It didn't need to. The silence that followed was filled with a residue of threat, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the words and were holding them in reserve. Every creak of wood, every distant hum of the refrigerator became a cruel reminder. I was trapped. In the days that followed, the words poisoned everything I did. Stepping outside no longer felt like leaving the presence behind. It felt like carrying a leash I couldn't see. Even in crowded streets, I imagined the whisper weaving between the noise of engines and conversations, murmuring just for me, "You can't escape." At work, when people spoke, their voices blurred, and I half expected the shadow's sentence to slip out of their mouths instead. At night, the warning grew more precise. The words stretched into variations. "Don't run. You belong to me." Sometimes I would jolt awake to find the phrase half-formed on my own lips, as though the shadow wasn't merely speaking to me but through me. The idea was unbearable, that its voice had fused with mine, that the threat no longer needed to be whispered externally, because it was already rooted inside my thoughts. I tried fighting it, talking back in the dark like a desperate child. "You're not real. I can leave. I can make you stop." But the moment I dared to defy it, the lights flickered violently, plunging the room into strobe-like flashes, and in the gaps between light and dark I saw it closer than ever before, towering, faceless, leaning toward me as though it were about to crawl inside my skin. The message was unmistakable. Resistance was futile. The shadow had no intention of letting me go. The words were not simply a warning, they were a sentence, a declaration of ownership. And in my gut, I knew the truth. It wasn't chasing me. It wasn't tormenting me just for sport. It was waiting, patiently, cruelly. It was guiding me to the inevitable moment when I would no longer resist, when escape would no longer be a question, because the warning wasn't about the present, it was about the end. You can't escape, not now, not ever. There comes a moment when fear can no longer be contained, when the body, pushed too far, flips into something raw and violent. For weeks I had swallowed the whispers, endured the glimpses, lived with the suffocating knowledge that something unnatural stalked me in the dark. I had tried denial, I had tried reason, I had tried silence. None of it mattered. The shadow grew bolder, closer, hungrier, and one night, something in me finally cracked. It was just after 3 in the morning, that cursed hour when the world feels thinnest. I had woken again, chest tight, from the sensation of being watched. The room was suffocating in its stillness. Shadows pooled like oil across the floorboards. The whisper came low, steady, mocking. "You can't escape." It lingered in the air like a hand pressed against my throat. That was when rage bloomed. It was sudden, hot, explosive. My body trembled, not from fear this time, but from fury. I was done being hunted in my own home. I was done lying awake, begging silently for peace. My voice erupted before I could stop it, shattering the quiet. "Leave me alone." The words tore from my throat, raw and jagged, echoing against the walls like a desperate animal's cry. For a heartbeat, the silence that followed was complete. No whisper, no breath, not even the usual groan of the house at night. It was as though the world itself recoiled from my outburst. I thought foolishly that maybe it had worked, that perhaps, somehow, I had broken through. But then, slowly, it answered, not with words this time, but with laughter. It was soft at first, almost like the exhale of someone amused. Then it swelled, rising and falling in cruel waves, bouncing around the room until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. It wasn't human laughter, it was hollow, echoing, distorted, like dozens of voices trying to imitate the sound without ever quite getting it right. It scraped against my nerves, filling me with a terror worse than silence ever had. I covered my ears, curled forward, shouting over it, begging it to stop. "Go away. Get out. You don't belong here." My words cracked into sobs, but the laughter didn't falter. If anything, it deepened, mocking every syllable, every ounce of defiance. Then came the physical signs. The overhead light flickered violently, casting the room into jagged slices of brightness and dark. My desk chair rattled, vibrating against the floor, as though invisible hands had seized it. A picture frame crashed to the ground, glass splintering across the wood. The air grew icy, my breath visible in the flashes of light, and still, the laughter continued. That was the moment I realized the awful truth. It had never been about fear alone. The shadow wanted to break me, to drive me into desperation, so complete that I would invite it closer. My anger, my screaming, my shaking fists in the dark, they weren't weapons. They were offerings, proof that I was weakening, proof that it had almost won. When the laughter finally faded, leaving only the buzz of the light bulb overhead, I collapsed to the floor, trembling and hollow. My throat burned from screaming, my body from shaking. I had fought back, yes, but in doing so, I had given it exactly what it craved: attention, energy, permission. And in that moment of fragile silence, as tears blurred my vision, I knew something had shifted. I was no longer simply a victim resisting in vain. I had crossed a threshold. The shadow wasn't outside of me anymore, circling, testing, waiting. It was inside my rage, inside my words, inside the cracks of my breaking mind. And from here, there would be no turning back. It was inevitable. Every moment, every whisper, every sleepless night had been building toward this point. The night when running was no longer an option, when pretending ignorance would no longer shield me. I could feel it circling closer, pressing harder against the fragile barrier that separated my reality from its domain. Something inside me snapped, not in fear this time, but in grim resolve. If it wanted me, then it would have to face me. The clock read 3:13 a.m., that cursed hour when the veil between dreams and waking life seemed thinnest. I sat in the middle of my room, the floorboards icy beneath me, my palms flat against the wood, as though trying to ground myself. I turned off every light, lamp, phone, even the hallway switch, until the room was cloaked in total darkness. My heart pounded, a frenzied rhythm that echoed in my skull, but I forced my voice to remain steady as I whispered into the void. "Show yourself." The words cut through the silence like a blade. For a moment, nothing happened. No whisper, no movement, only the sound of my own ragged breathing. The stillness was suffocating, oppressive, as though the air had thickened into tar. I almost convinced myself it would not come, that my defiance had somehow driven it away. Then the temperature dropped, not gradually, but violently, like a plunge into icy water. My breath fogged in the dark, curling upward into pale ghosts. The wood beneath my palms trembled with a subtle vibration, and then I felt it, a cold hand against my back. I flinched, every muscle seizing in terror, but I refused to run. I stayed frozen in place, my fists clenched, as the chill sank deeper into my skin. The pressure of fingers, not flesh, not bone, but something weightless and impossibly heavy at once, pressed between my shoulder blades. The whisper returned, louder than ever, a guttural hiss inside my ear. "I'm here." I spun around violently, my breath tearing out of me in a sob, and there it was. The shadow no longer lingered at the edges of my vision, no longer hid behind mirrors or cloaked itself in the stutter of lights. It stood fully revealed before me, towering and faceless, its body a swirling mass of darkness that writhed like smoke, yet carried the undeniable weight of a living presence. It pulsed, expanding and contracting as if it breathed through the walls themselves. I wanted to scream, but the sound died in my throat. My eyes burned as I stared into the void where its face should have been. Though featureless, I felt its gaze pierce through me, dissecting me down to the marrow. My skin prickled as though 1,000 invisible needles pressed against it. For the first time, it moved without retreat. Its form leaned forward, shifting closer, and with each step the air grew denser, crushing my chest. My body shook, but I refused to back away. Rage and terror mingled until I found my voice again, trembling but defiant. "What do you want from me?" The shadow didn't speak in words this time. Instead, a deep rumble filled the room, a soundless vibration that shook my bones. My vision blurred, and I felt my thoughts falter, like pages being torn from a book. Its presence wasn't merely near me. It was inside me, peeling back my mind, prying open the cracks that fear had carved. I realized, with a clarity that chilled me to the core, that this was never about haunting me. It was about claiming me. Every whisper, every flicker, every night of stolen breath had been preparation, softening me for this moment of surrender. The confrontation I had demanded wasn't a battle, it was an invitation, and the shadow had finally accepted. The moment I turned and saw it standing there, time seemed to fracture. The room no longer felt like mine, no longer even like a room. The walls stretched impossibly wide, and yet pressed closer all at once, warping round the towering shape before me. The shadow was no longer a flicker or a suggestion, it was whole, a living void carved into the world, taller than the doorway, broader than my fear had ever imagined. Its body moved like liquid smoke, dense yet shifting, rising and folding into itself as though it couldn't hold still. But the worst was its face, or rather, the absence of one. Where features should have been, there was nothing but an oval void, a hungry hollowness that devoured light. Staring into it was like staring into the abyss of a well with no bottom, and the longer I looked, the more it felt as though I were falling into it, being pulled inside. My breath came in ragged gasps, my legs trembled, every muscle in my body urging me to run, to flee into the night and never return. But something stronger than terror rooted me to the spot. Curiosity, defiance, or perhaps some darker instinct, I couldn't name it, chained me there. I too now locked in a gaze with the abyss itself. Then it leaned closer. The movement was slow, deliberate, filled with a dreadful patience. Its body did not walk the way humans did. It glided, as if the ground offered no resistance, as though the very concept of distance bent to its will. My skin prickled as the air around me grew denser, thicker, like invisible hands pressing against my chest. Every breath was a struggle. When it was only inches away, I felt it, not with sight or sound, but with something deeper. The shadow radiated not heat or cold, but a kind of vibration that hummed through my bones, rattled my teeth, made my vision shiver at the edges. My thoughts began to blur, words dissolving in my head, as though the creature was sifting through them, claiming them as its own. I whispered, my voice breaking, "Why me?" The void tilted, the formless head bending ever so slightly, like a predator curious about its prey. It gave no answer, not in words. Instead, a sound filled the room, a low resonance that wasn't heard with ears, but felt inside the body, inside the marrow. My ribs buzzed with it, my heart stuttered against its rhythm. I collapsed to my knees, clutching my chest as if I could hold myself together. And then came the realization, sharp and merciless. It didn't need to answer. The shadow didn't want to torment me without reason. It didn't need a reason at all. I wasn't chosen for anything specific. I was simply available, alone, vulnerable, a vessel waiting to be hollowed out. The faceless void leaned closer still, and in its emptiness I began to see fragments, reflections of myself. My own face rippling in and out of the darkness, distorted, stretched, smiling when I was not, screaming when my lips stayed sealed. It was showing me the truth. The boundary between it and me was gone. The shadow was no longer just behind me, no longer just watching. It was reaching, pouring itself forward, preparing to step inside, and for the first time, I wasn't sure whether I was resisting or welcoming it. There was no single moment when it took me, only a slow, patient unweaving, as if the shadow were undoing the stitches that held me together. At first it felt like pressure, a cold, spreading weight that settled along my spine and crept into the joints of my fingers. Then sensation dulled, like a radio being turned down. Edges went soft, tastes flattened, sounds pulled away until my world became a narrow tunnel of muffled things. I tried to move, to fight, but my limbs answered as if through someone else's command, slow, reluctant, familiar and wrong. The darkness did not enter with violence. It seeped like ink through fabric, finding the gaps I'd learned to hide in, the hollow where grief lived, the thin seam left by sleeplessness, the quiet spaces carved out by loneliness. It slid into thoughts, first tiny intruding phrases that were not mine but fit too comfortably. Small urges flared, to stand in the doorway and listen, to press my palm to the mirror until the glass fogged with breath and I could no longer tell whether the face, looking back, was mine or something borrowed from a darker place. A sound like dry leaves whispered across my ears, and with each breath it taught my lungs a new rhythm, longer inhales, a hollow pause, a slow exhale that drew nothing back. My heartbeat, once erratic with fear, synchronized to a cadence that belonged to it. Memories frayed like old photographs, some edges blurred, others darkened, until I could not say if the touch of a parent's hand, the taste of summer, or the sound of a friend's laugh were mine or echoes made by the thing inside me. I felt it map, lifting a corner of memory, probing an ache, cataloguing private sins and quiet joys alike. Things I had buried deep surfaced without warning, the words I'd never said, the apologies left unsent, the faces I'd stopped calling. The shadow sorted them like a locksmith testing keys, searching for the one that would turn and open me entirely. When it found that key, there was a small, intimate surrender. My reflection in the darkened window smiled before I did. My hand went to my chest and rested there, as if to check that my heart still belonged to me. The change was not cinematic, no convulsions, no theatrical roar. Instead, a hush moved through me, a private agreement between two halves that had learned to speak each other's language. I felt my name shift, hollow out, and reform around something else. Outside, the city continued its indifferent breathing. Inside, I became a house with a new tenant, quiet furniture rearranged, familiar rooms slightly unfamiliar, a voice that sometimes came from me and sometimes from the space beside me. When I tried to call for help, my mouth shaped the words, and another voice answered, lowered, layered, speaking the truth in a tongue I understood and did not. It was not pain so much as inversion. Warmth grew where cold had been. Hope soured into something that looked like contentment, and the small rebellion in my chest smoothed into a patient, obedient stillness. Possession was not the end of a struggle. It was the erasure of its possibility. The shadow did not kill who I was. It moved in, folded itself around my edges, and made me useful. It taught me new silences and how to hold them. And when friends later asked why I seemed different, quieter, calmer, a little too collected, I found myself answering with the same even cadence, all trace of panic ironed flat. Some nights, in the thinnest part of the dark, a part of me stirred tiny protests, a flinch of memory that felt like regret. But each time, the thing inside whispered back with such intimacy that resistance grew absurd. Like arguing with your own reflection. The shadow had not simply taken a body, it had rewritten the script, and I what was left of me read along, voice steady, page turned dot. There is no longer a line between where I end and where it begins. At first, I thought possession would feel like imprisonment, like my mind locked away in a dark cage while something else steered the body. But the truth is far worse. It feels natural, seamless, as though the shadow had always been a part of me, waiting for its time to surface. The days blur now. I move through them like a stranger wearing my own skin. To those around me, I am still myself. I speak, I smile, I nod at the right moments. But inside, I feel the echo of another presence, a second heartbeat pulsing beneath my own, slow and patient. When I talk, sometimes the words feel chosen for me. When I breathe, I can sense its rhythm guiding mine, an unshakable reminder that my lungs no longer belong only to me. Mirrors have become unbearable. I avoid them when I can, but sometimes I catch my reflection in a window or the back of a spoon, and I see it just for an instant. My eyes linger too long, unblinking, or my mouth curls into a smile I did not choose. Once, late at night, I whispered my name aloud, hoping to tether myself to something familiar. What came back wasn't my voice. It was layered, distorted, deeper, as though the shadow had spoken through me. Sleep brings no escape. Dreams are no longer mine but shared landscapes where it waits for me, faceless and endless, walking beside me as if we are companions rather than jailer and prisoner. I wake with words in my mouth, syllables from no language I know, yet heavy with meaning. And each time, I feel a little less alarmed by it, a little more willing to let the syllables roll across my tongue. At times, I wonder if this is what it wanted all along, not to haunt me, not to torment me, but to become me. It whispers not threats now, but instructions. Gentle nudges, a tilt of the head toward a stranger passing by, a pulse of hunger when I stand too close to someone in the dark. I obey without realizing until it is too late. I feel my hands move, my lips part, my body act, and I cannot say for certain if those are my choices anymore. There are moments when I catch fragments of my old self, buried deep, crying out in protest, a flicker of resistance, a memory of what it felt like to be free. But those moments are brief and fragile, smothered almost instantly by the weight of its presence. My protests echo inside a hollow chamber, drowned beneath its steady, commanding silence. I no longer ask, why me? The question has dissolved into something more terrifying. What am I becoming? Because I am not disappearing, I am not gone. I am still here, watching from the inside, forced to witness the slow merging of my will with its own. The horror is not that it destroyed MIT, is that it has made me complicit, turning me into something in dash between dot. So now, when people pass me on the street, they smile politely, unaware. They don't see the shadow in my eyes, or the slight delay before my smile forms, or the way my footsteps echo in perfect rhythm with another that no one else can hear. They look at me and see only a person. But I know better. I am not just a person anymore. I am a vessel, a mask, a host to something ancient and patient, something that waited in silence until I was weak enough to welcome it in. The shadow no longer follows me. It no longer whispers from the dark or lurks in the corner of my eye. It doesn't need to, because the shadow is me, and every time I breathe, it breathes too. Every time I speak, it listens. Every time I move, it tightens its grip. I have become the thing that haunted me, and soon, others will, too.